Okay. I don't need that volume. I just need my volume, right? Okay, giving that a second for it to pop up and for it to be 9 o'clock, because that's when those things happen. Good morning, everyone. It's starting to come together. I hope everybody's doing well. We had a break in July, so it's been a little bit. I hope everybody's having a good time. You guys are still enjoying the birds. Feel free to drop a comment as to what birds you're seeing a lot of in your yard right now, because it's certainly getting very busy this time of year. Nesting season is kind of coming to a close. We have a lot of our goldfinches that are still nesting in July and August. And of course, like sometimes wrens and other birds will still keep going, but we are starting to wind down in that season. You may also notice a lot of molting going on. So if your birds look like they got out of the wrong side of bed and they weren't ready to wake up yet, and they're looking very fluffed up and kind of a mess, that's a good sign that it's molting season, where a lot of birds are losing their old feathers and growing new ones in time for the seasonal shift. So have fun watching that with all of your birds this time of year. You might notice some bald cardinals as well, which is always the best time. I always call it ugly bird season because it's one of my favorites. But yeah, just some things to kind of keep an eye out for and all that kind of stuff as well. We're going to give it another minute before we get started. Good morning. I hope everybody's doing well. Let me see what else. I'm trying to think. I think those are the primary ones. For those that are still looking to do some shopping this weekend, we have our seed cylinder sale going on until Monday. So DSC members get 20% off, non-DSC gets 15% off. So definitely feel free to take advantage of that this weekend as well. All right, good morning, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. It is 8:30, so we're gonna go ahead and just jump right into it. Today, oh goodness, maybe I should start with the intro, right? Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. My name is Jolene. I'm a certified songbird feeding specialist with Wild Birds Unlimited of Concord, and I am rusty because we took a month off. But today we are going to be talking about migration, which is a very exciting time of year, and it's coming up soon. So I wanted to kind of prepare everybody for that and what to expect. So if you have any questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to drop a comment. I will be doing my best to respond to those either during the presentation or afterwards as well. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. So for those that don't know what migration is, it is basically a seasonal movement that happens twice a year. For our location in North Carolina, it happens in the spring and in the fall, between March and May and August and October, where the birds shuffle between their breeding habitat to their wintering habitat. And birds will be going back and forth, so it's not like we lose all of our birds in the winter time. We get different ones that come in as well. So it's a very interesting type of movement because birds of different sizes are moving all over the world, and it's crazy to witness as well. It's one of my favorite things. Not every bird migrates the same way, nor at the same time. So you can have some birds that start in the beginning of migration and shuffle out really early. So for example, right now we are in August. This is barely the beginning of migration, but there might be certain shorebirds that are on the move, some of the warblers, some of our thrushes, while in October, or like kind of late September, early October, that won't be until some of our hummingbirds, for example, start moving out as well. So there's different time frames for different birds. So that's always a nice thing to kind of focus on. September is a peak season where a lot of activity is happening all at once, but it definitely varies depending on the species as to when. Not everyone also migrates the same distance as well. There are a few different ranges depending on the individual species. There are some that are long distance migrants, so these are the ones that travel thousands of miles to different continents. Hummingbirds, for example, fall in this category as they travel from North America sometimes to Central or South America as well, and they really push that distance too. Short distance migrants are those that travel maybe just a few hundred miles. So they might be in North America in like the Northeast and just shuffle down to like the Southeast area or the Midwest. Or if it's an elevation change, so for us in North Carolina, we have the Appalachian Mountains on the I know my directions on the western side of North Carolina. Some of those birds in the wintertime might shuffle down to the more Piedmont area or the coastal area where the temperatures are not as cold. So it can vary depending on the time of year and who we have. Some of our short distance migrants include robins or cedar waxwings, which is really cool. Or we have some birds that may choose not to migrate at all. So birds like cardinals or wrens and chickadees are all nice kind of permanent residents in our area where maybe they'll shuffle from like neighborhood to neighborhood, but you can usually count on them to be there regardless of the time of year. And just to show kind of how long some of these distances migration can be, the Arctic tern has one of the longest migration paths of any bird. And basically, their migration path is 44,000 miles. And basically, they make a figure eight pattern from the Arctic to the Antarctic throughout the year, because that is just what is best suited for their lifestyle as well, too. So they find that trip is definitely worth it. So, of course, that does bring up some questions. Why do these birds need to migrate? It happens twice a year, so we know they do it for a very good reason. And that's honestly because the benefits of doing so outweigh the risks of traveling, because this is not a safe and easy trip to make. There's lots of different issues that can come up with migration. So a few different reasons that they might choose to migrate include weather conditions. So if we have birds that are nesting up in like northern North America in like Canada or some of the cooler locations, as it gets into cooler winter time, those temperatures might not be high enough for them to sustain themselves. So they might come down to a lower go down farther south in order to continue to stay warm through the winter season, for example. Maybe their dietary preferences no longer match up with that area. So if the habitat no longer has insects or fruit that they can take advantage of, they might switch to a different location to take advantage of those resources. You might also be thinking, so for birds that live in more tropical areas, so for example, a lot of our warblers, and even hummingbirds too, they live in more tropical areas. The temperatures can sometimes be a little bit more stable. They can have insects or fruit or any of that stuff throughout the year, depending on. So why exactly would they make the trip farther north to more temperate locations that have those weather changes? And the reason for that is because a lot of tropical areas often have very high population and species variety and density. So you have a lot more competition for territory in some of those spaces. So certain birds are like, you know what? I'm going to come back later. I'm going to go somewhere else, take a little bit more time for me, and get a little bit more space. There's also a little bit more different resources. And they decide that taking that trip is more suitable for their needs. Reproductive success also varies. So a lot of birds in tropical areas maybe only have 2 to 3 eggs per brood because that's the most that they can sustain with the oh my goodness, with the resources that they have available. While those that move up to the more temperate areas like our area might have 3 to 5 eggs per brood. So there's definitely differences and different strategies as for what's more effective. Now, some people also get concerned that maybe migration isn't something that the birds always know is supposed to happen. So, for example, hummingbirds, a lot of people get concerned that if they leave their hummingbird feeders out, the hummingbirds will not migrate. They'll just stay there and continue eating that food. That is not quite the case. There are a lot of different factors that tell birds when they need to migrate, including daylight. So, as the days get shorter or longer, the birds will start to register that the time has changed and they'll need to move soon. Temperature and food availability can also be big ones. Again, those resources might change with the season, so the birds are always paying attention to that because those high metabolisms make those resources crucial for their survival. And also biological patterns that occur within their bodies as well. Digestion often starts to slow automatically due to these other factors to help allow for fat reserves. So they have storage to pull from for energy as they make these long trips as well. Now, there are some movements that are not based on those timing and instinctual events, right? Certain movements called eruptions or invasions can occur specifically due to food availability and not necessarily due to any other reason. So not regarding the daylight or temperatures or things like that as well. This type of this type of movement is a cyclical pattern, so it responds correlated to like food availability. So if there's less food available, the birds will spread out more to find more of those resources in different locations. This often occurs with birds that winter in more northern regions, so those that would be in more of our northern states or in Canada. If their winter period doesn't have a lot of food in their normal region, they will push down farther. So this can include common redpolls, pine siskins, even evening grosbeaks, and snowy owls. These movements are often unpredictable. We don't know where they're going or kind of what years those will definitely occur, but when they do happen, we know when they happen. So pine siskins, for example, had an eruption in 2020 if you were bird feeding back then in the winter, and you might have noticed these birds were everywhere. And that was due to a lack of conifer seeds that were available in their usual region. So they pushed out farther to find those resources. Meanwhile, on the exact opposite side, we had snowy owls that had an eruption back in 2016. This was due to an increase in lemmings that previous nesting season that allowed the birds to actually raise more young successfully that season. And with the population so large, they kind of spread out a ridiculous amount in order to kind of get enough habitat and resources for each individual. That actually allowed for people to start doing more research on the snowy owls through a project called Operation Snowstorm. I believe, I think that's it. But basically that allowed them to kind of do more research on these snow owls and start keeping track of them from that point on, which was also very interesting. Now, there's a few ways that birds can often figure out where they need to go because they make this trip quite often, so they have to know how they're getting to their location. These birds navigate by different landmarks such as like the sun, moon, stars, and they can even determine some of the Earth's magnetic field as they're kind of figuring out which way to go. They can also recognize different landmarks such as mountains, rivers, and coastlines, and they can determine certain odors. Their sense of smell is not the same as ours, but there are certain aspects that they do recognize that help them determine where they are going. There's also two different types of migrants as well. You have your diurnal migrants, so those that migrate during the day, which include a lot of our hawks, vultures, swallows, swifts, and hummingbirds. These are birds that travel due to the thermals that are available during the daytime or due to the food availability. So this includes a lot of our insect eaters that'll take advantage of those insects as they're eating on the wing, and also hawks and vultures, who are more of a soaring species. So those thermals are basically columns of hot air that rise during the day. And what the hawks and vultures will do is they'll basically soar up those thermals to kind of conserve energy before they start continuing their flight and soaring farther out. So just to show an example of what that can look like, because it is a very cool behavior to witness, is oftentimes certain birds that are migrating. So for example, broad-winged hawks are a very big migrant that we have in this area. They can meet up in certain areas and all take advantage of like the same thermals. And that is what is called a kettle when you have multiple birds that are soaring in the same area. When you have a bottleneck in certain areas for migration season, you can get factors that look like this. You can have kettles of hundreds and hundreds of birds that are basically just coasting on these thermals before they start moving out again. So a lot of these are broad-winged hawks. You can definitely find other birds in the same area. So like if there were also vultures or eagles or things like that, you can also have them kind of all coasting in that same area. But it is an absolutely marvelous behavior to see and occurs primarily during migration season as well. So very cool to witness. I hope to see one of these in person one day. It is absolutely stunning and very interesting. So not only do we have those diurnal migrants, we also have nocturnal migrants, or those that migrate at night. This is actually going to be majority of a lot of our songbirds, but it includes a lot of our wood warblers, vireos, and thrushes. Oftentimes, some benefits to migrating at night include cooler temperatures, which allows for less overheating. These guys are doing a lot of work because they, again, don't have those winds, at least not always, but they're doing a lot of work and movement in order to push themselves forward. So Cooler temperatures help keep them from overheating. Those stable winds do work in their favor. There's less of those thermals happening at night, so there's less kind of stress in working against the wind at certain points. And also there is safety against a lot of daytime predators. It's harder to basically go for these guys when you can't see very well. And oftentimes they'll migrate at night and then take pit stops during the day. So that is why we often see a few of our warblers of different species maybe for a few days before they start moving out and continuing that journey. Now, one thing I kind of hinted at is that in order to make these trips, these birds require a lot of energy to do so. And in some cases, certain birds will not always stop in order to get the food that they need to refuel, or they may not have the chance. So these birds try and stock up on a lot of energy as fast as possible before they make the trip. So the best foods to stock up on are those that have fattier foods. Oftentimes fat is a great option for birds as it has high energy reserves and it stores more water at twice the rate of protein and carbs. So it is the best thing for them during this time of year. So when they start bulking up on fat, oftentimes it's distributed throughout the cavities and the organs in the body. And depending on how far these birds are traveling, depends on how much fat they need in order to completely make the trip as well. So birds that aren't really migrating may have like 5% of fat per their total body weight. And that's kind of all they're dealing with. But those that are making thousands of miles for a trip and those long distance migrants need to double their entire weight in body fat in order to be successful on their journey. So hummingbirds, for example, before they migrate out, will double their weight before they make the trip because that is what is required in order to have that safe trip. And just to show what this can look like, because it's very interesting. I know this picture might look stressful. These birds are still alive. They're completely unharmed. Basically, this is just a way to kind of examine them to see their body condition as they're either banded or anything like that. So just to clarify that. But I just want to show what this fat storage can look like on different types of birds. So in this image, we have a yellow-rumped warbler on the left and a black-poll warbler on the right. The black-poll warbler makes a much farther trip than the yellow-rumped warbler does for migration. So what you're looking at is essentially the belly of these birds. In order for birds to fly, on their sternum there is a protrusion of bone called the keel. And the keel is what allows the flight muscles to attach in order for them to kind of flap their wings, right? So on this yellow-rumped warbler, there's this center line, and that is the tip of the keel or the sternum. And that red is that muscle that allows them to kind of fly, that connects to their wings. On the right, you cannot see the keel because there is so much fat covering up and being stored in that body because that is what it takes in order to fly. And because I don't know how much you know about the anatomy of birds, but birds try and remain as lightweight as possible in order to make these trips. So if there is a bird that is willing to bulk up this much, you know how important it is for those reserves to kind of make it throughout the entire trip. So I always found this really interesting to kind of see how those different species will stock up on those fats and resources. Now, some other things that we like to kind of mention as we're dealing with migration is to kind of help make it easier to track. We have kind of sorted different sections into general flyways. North America is set into 4 different flyways: the Atlantic, the Mississippi, the Central, and the Pacific. These are general routes used by many migrants from various species where you can kind of easily see where those birds are starting to kind of, not bottleneck, but kind of travel through different areas. Flyways aren't used by everyone, obviously. Certain birds will use other things, but it just makes it easier for us to kind of manage and keep track of. And not every bird will use the same route in both the spring and the fall. Oftentimes, due to weather patterns or wind conditions, they will pick different routes. And that's why we may only see certain birds during certain seasons of migration. So, for example, rose-breasted grosbeaks in this area, we can see them in both the spring and the fall, but we always see them very consistently in the spring because they use that same path in the spring and they might shift later in the fall. Usually flyways also have areas that are marked over as stopover sites. So again, in regards to migration in general, the birds keep track of not only their destination, but fantastic pit stops that allow them to rest for a little bit with some food and some shelter from the elements or potential predators. So city parks, nice forested areas, lakes, or trees that are used as windbreaks on open land, all the birds take advantage of paying attention to these different things, especially as they're moving forward. I know that North Carolina has a lot of wetland or marsh habitat, more on its, my goodness, the eastern side that a lot of birds take advantage of. And I know, because I found it very interesting when I was in my ornithology class, the Salton Sea out west was noticed because that is a huge stop in the middle of nowhere for a lot of migrating birds to take advantage of with resources as well. So these are all important things to note as they kind of are making that journey too. Now, like we've kind of mentioned, there's a lot of risk for a good reward, but it's definitely very dangerous for these birds to make these trips. And there's a few reasons as to why. These trips are often physically and mentally taxing. These birds can be flying for days on end, and in certain cases, some may stop, some may not, in order to get to their destination. There can be a lack of food or uncertainty of food, depending on if those same pit stops that they were looking for, those rest stops, are still available the following year. And also, again, they're focusing on flying rather than trying to eat a lot more food. That's why they bulked up on fat in the first place. Poor weather conditions, so kind of like freak storms or things that can happen through various times of year can often lead to like migratory fallouts where whole flocks shift to a completely different area that they weren't expecting, or potential vagrant sightings. So species that are not in their usual range being sighted there due to those poor weather conditions. Building strikes and window strikes are a big issue as well during this time of year. Oftentimes when birds are migrating at night and flying over cities, usually a lot of lights are still on at night, and depending on temperatures, it's not uncommon for a lot of cloud cover to kind of show off a lot more of the light that might be pointing upwards towards the sky. Birds, again, use like the stars and other things to orient themselves, but if those are not available, sometimes they do fly too low because they get distracted by those lights, and they can hit various buildings or windows as well. So that can always be a concern, especially in the fall when there's a lot more juveniles that are flying with the current flock as well. And there's also concerns of losing migration habitat. So in areas where, again, these birds are used to those certain rest stops that they take along the way, there's sometimes a loss of that, whether it's due to construction or just in general, the landscape changes or something happens. They may not have that available the next season. So for North Carolina, those wetlands and those pine and hardwood forests can be very important to those birds' survival. And those are kind of slowly in danger depending on how construction and development kind of continues to take place. So it's important to have certain safe havens for those birds available. This image here, I wanted to show you, it's actually really cool because one of the things that you can do during migration season is that there is a website called Birdcast that keeps track using weather radar patterns, as well as like years of research to determine what are the biggest movements of migrating birds that season. So you can actually keep track as the season moves forward of what kind of heavy activity we might see during those migration patterns. So you can see this was from September 19th of 24, how busy it was in that kind of let me look at it for a second. In between the Atlantic, there you go, Atlantic and Mississippi Flyway, a lot of these birds kind of taking advantage and moving out in that area and range. So very cool thing to check out if you're ever bored or want to learn more about migration. Now, one thing that people have been initiating more of is a lights out campaign. So this is something that some cities are taking advantage of and actually supporting, where they will kind of turn their lights off at night. And depending on where you live, you can also do the same thing in order to kind of make the trip for these birds a little bit more manageable. Now, this occurs in spring and fall migration from March to May and September to November, so during the peak seasons of the kind of migration. Basically, it requests that you turn lights off at night or extinguish pot and floodlights, closing blinds and curtains at night so that you're not having as much light pollution in certain areas. If you work in an office building, asking your employer to turn off upward facing lights and interior office lights from 11 p.m. to dawn during this period. This basically kind of just helps reduce light pollution and helps confuse the birds less, so they're able to make their journey a little bit more safely. There are a lot of North Carolina cities with these policies in place. Some are a little bit different than others, but feel free to kind of look into that as well. And if your city does not take advantage of that, to kind of learn more about it or do your part as well during this season and time of year. Now, one really fun part about migration season is not only is it just this huge movement of birds in general, but we get to enjoy it as well if we choose to take the time to do so. In the fall is a great time to take bird walks, whether it's with your local Audubon chapter or birding club, and taking the time to go see the different types of species we have in the area. ncbirdingtrail.org is also a great resource for our state that points out different greenways and reserves that you can visit in order to see like the best type of bird activity. The Hummingbird Festival, which is kind of already happening, it's ending this weekend, happens at Reedy Creek Park every year, where there's a lot of hummingbird bandings, a little bit of bird walks, there's a lot of vendors, it's a lot of fun, and just celebrating our hummingbirds. Definitely a very cool event that happens yearly. The Wings Over Water event is something that I want to see at some point in my life. It's basically a huge bird watching event that has 60 different like bird walks in those certain areas in different coastal wildlife refuges. It happens from October 15th to 19th, and again, the coast and those kinds of coastal areas have such big like species diversity during migration. It's so exciting to witness. If you feel like going up to the mountains in September, Grandfather Mountain hosts a hawk watch all through September 1st through 30th, where they have volunteers that stay up near the Mile High Bridge and count the number and different types of species that are migrating through during the day. So whether that's eagles, hawks, vultures, they keep track of that, and then they post their results at the end of the month. Sometimes it's super busy. Sometimes it's very quiet, but it's still a very fun event to pay attention to as well. And of course, if you can't really make it out anywhere, citizen science projects such as Celebrating Urban Birds, Project Feeder Watch, Nest Watch, Great Backyard Bird Count, all of these happen throughout the year. They may not necessarily be during migration season, but you can always update any bird counts you do yourself, where you watch the birds for at least 15 minutes and see what species you see. You can always upload that to eBird, and those results can also help ornithologists determine what kind of movements are happening with that as well. And if you can't go anywhere, you do want to check out the Birdcast Migration Dashboard. This actually tells you a lot about the current movements. So first off, this is very similar to the photo I showed earlier, but basically they do have a radar that shows you kind of more in real time what these birds are doing and what kind of movements they're making. So you can check these out to determine what's currently happening this time of month. And then they also have a migration dashboard for North Carolina. So you can check this out as well too. It shows you what are the expected nocturnal migrants for this time of year. Wood thrush, wood peewees, flycatchers, vireos, warblers, the yellow-billed cuckoo. These are all birds that are moving out this time of year. It also shows the birds in flight for their nightly average, the migration traffic that's going on, and things like that as well. So feel free to check those out at your leisure if you want to learn more about that as well too. And if you're not really interested in that part, but of course still want to feed your birds, fatty foods can be a great option as we get more into like September and October or like later August. So suets are going to be great because they are rendered beef kidney fat. Whether you use like cakes, cylinders, plugs, like the balls or anything like that, that's completely up to you. Bark butter or bark butter bits are also great options as well. Deshelled or whole peanuts that are raw or roasted and unsalted are high in fat and protein, so that is really good for any time of year. Sunflower chips also have high oil content, so that's great as well. That can be easily converted, and that's fun for everyone. Everybody always loves those. Dried fruit or jelly can also be good options. Fruit is high in sugar and easily converted into fat. So whether you have this in like one of the plus blends, for example, so like Tree Nutty Plus, Choice Plus, No Mess Plus, or just use like a little bit of grape jelly. Don't use jam because that has a lot of fruit pieces that can be a little bit more gunky to the birds. but you can use a nice jelly that doesn't have any like sugar-free or substitute additives or things like that. So just straight up regular jelly. Um, we don't have it right now because, again, we are in that weird mix season where some birds are just starting to move, but many others are molting. So right now, a lot of those molting birds still require a lot of protein. So we still have some of our nesting blend or anything with mealworms, or again, those peanuts are a great option. But eventually, in like later September and October, we're going to be switching over to like the winter super blend that has a variety of food items that are high in fat, which is great for like this time of year as well too. So these are all different food options that you can offer. I know a lot of people enjoy kind of trying to attract the orioles to their feeders. Orioles are oftentimes going to be migrating. September is like kind of the more peak area, but you can still have some kind of shuffle through in October. So if you do want to try that, I would say late August, kind of start to get that together so that you can be in the routine of kind of changing those options out. You can also use fresh oranges as well, and put those out and just make sure that those do not get fermented or moldy, because again, we're still dealing with some hot and humid weather this time of year. So just be mindful of the type of food that you put out and make sure that you keep it refreshed and restocked as needed as well. All right. And that's kind of all I have about migration today as well. So for those of you that were hoping to shop today as well, there is a coupon code called Flyway that'll get you $5 off a $25 purchase or more. Only available today, either in-store or through phone order if you would like to use that too. There will be a second viewing of this presentation at 11 a.m. if you know anybody in the area that might be interested. And of course, I will be shifting this presentation over to YouTube as well if you want to send it to somebody that way too. Most of the photos were again taken from like Macaulay Library at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The figure that showed the two birds and like the fat reserves came from the Handbook of Bird Biology, which is just basically a giant scientific textbook that has everything you need to know about birds possible, which is fantastic. And don't forget, you can check out Birdcast as needed as well if you want to learn more about those migration movements that we have in the area. So thank you guys very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll answer as it goes. So thank you all very much, and I'll be sure to see you next month. Bye!